willing, we will be starting today from Surah 33, verse 50. Let's all seek refuge in God from Satan the rejected. Auzu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. 33:50. O Prophet, we made lawful for you wives to whom you have paid their due dowry, or what you already have, as granted to you by God. Also lawful for you in marriage are the daughters of your father's brothers, the daughters of your father's sisters, the daughters of your father's sisters, the daughters of your mother's brothers, the daughters of your mother's sisters who have immigrated with you. Also, if a believing woman gave herself to the Prophet by forfeiting the dowry, the Prophet may marry her without a dowry, if he so wishes. However, her forfeiting of the dowry applies only to the Prophet and not to the other believers. We have already decreed their rights in regard to their spouses or what they already have. This is to spare you any embarrassment. God is forgiver and most merciful. You may gently shun any one of them, and you may bring closer to you any one of them. If you reconcile with anyone you had estranged, you commit no error. In this way they will be pleased, will have no grief, and will be content with what you equitably offer to all of them. God knows what is in your hearts. God is omniscient, clement. Beyond the categories described to you, you're enjoined from marrying any other women, nor can you substitute a new wife from the prohibited categories, no matter how much you admire their beauty. You must be content with those already made lawful for you. God is watchful over all things. And the footnotes for the next verse. So, okay, so these verses actually are there to let us know the women that we can marry and the women that we cannot marry, and what are the rights of women. For example, we see here that you're supposed to give dowry, as stated in another place in the Quran. When you get married, it's one of the requirements, and it's not something that can be forfeited completely. I mean, of course, a wife may adjust to reduce her dowry, if she wants, but she cannot completely forfeit the dowry. I mean, these are one of her rights, and she's required to want dowry as part of the requirements for marriage. So you have to give some dowry, and you have to give it equitably, as God says. Dowry is supposed to be, dowry is supposed to be, security for the woman. Obviously, the woman that you married, it's not the same woman after, she's divorced. So it's there as a security for the woman that in case she gets divorced, that money should provide her, with enough to allow her to live comfortably for about a year before, she gets resettled. So we have to be equitable in carrying out God's law. But, there is only one condition here where we see that only person who was exempted from having the dowry was the Prophet, due to the circumstances at the time. And so in that case only, the dowry has to be forfeited. And God says this was to spare him any embarrassment. So obviously, there were certain marriages that had to take place during the time of Prophet Muhammad, and he could not, have the dowry for each one of them. So to spare him the embarrassment, God, exempted him from, having to give dowry. If the wife was forfeiting it, if the wife said that no, I want it, then he would have to give it too, right? Because it's her right. But only the women that were marrying the Prophet were allowed to have that choice to not have dowry and to just completely forfeit it. But dowry for everyone else, dowry is a mandatory requirement for marriage, and you cannot marry a woman without setting the dowry. And God says that you may gently shun any one of them, and you may bring closer to you any one of them, If you reconcile with anyone you had estranged, you commit no error. In this way, they will be pleased, will have no grief, and will be content with what you equitably offer to all of them. So obviously, this is only applying to the prophet, and it's talking about a an arrangement where he had these wives, and so it was difficult. God says you can never be equitable in dealing with more than one wife, and so he had all of these wives, and obviously, there was a lot going on at the time as well. So God made some flexibility for him that he could, if there's any wife that he had shunned or estranged for some
Brother,
reason, that he
brother,
could
I'm
bring her
hearing
closer.
background, background things. Can you hear?
So in that way, the wives will also be pleased, and then will
Brother, can
have
you hear?
no grief, and then they'll be content with everything that the prophet has to offer, because there's you know his time was precious,
Hello?
and it was being shared across, so be very difficult and challenging, for someone like that, in that position, to be able to be equitable with all of them, and to be able to give all of them enough time, you know, and to be able to give dowry for each one of them. So God gave him some leeway there. But even there were restrictions. For example, there was categories through from which he could marry, but not. But there were other categories that were prohibited, that are prohibited for any believer, and he could not marry from those. And God says you could not. He could not substitute from those categories, no matter how much he admired their beauty. And so, I guess, so one thing we also see here is that the categories that are allowed for believers to marry from also includes cousins, family members that are distant relatives, and this is something that is really frowned upon in certain societies, like the Western society. But we have God's laws in place, and God's laws and His knowledge supersedes any other knowledge. And obviously there are studies that have been conducted by people that by humans like me and you, right? That say that if you marry within the same family, you'll have genetic issues, but you'll also have issues, if you marry, outside the family. And so it's something that is, actually controlled by God, and we have nations where this is commonplace, and they don't really have any serious, issues. So, I believe this is something of the past. As science, progresses, I think their information should also change. But this is just my view. I mean, it's more of a cultural thing than anything, where people have done studies around it to prove what they believe is correct. But as far as God is concerned, there's no such restriction. And if it's bad for us, God would, let us know that we shouldn't be doing it. So there's nothing wrong, and people shouldn't be ashamed of marrying within the family, of course. When you're living in a Western society, I mean, it becomes like a sort of a stigma, if you end up marrying within the family. But, this should be totally normal. And I believe that the believers should not be ashamed or hesitate, when it comes to marrying within the family. So God willing, I'll continue reading. Verse 53, etiquette. O you who believe, do not enter the prophets' homes unless you are given permission to eat, nor shall you force such an invitation in any manner. If you're invited, you may enter. When you finish eating, you shall leave. Do not engage him in lengthy conversations. This used to hurt the prophet, and he was too shy to tell you. But God does not shy away from the truth. If you have to ask his wives for something, ask them from behind a barrier. This is pure for your hearts and their hearts. You are not to hurt the messenger of God. You shall not marry his wives after him, for this would be a gross offense in the sight of God. And then the footnote says, we are enjoined in 422 from marrying women who were previously married to our fathers, nor can the father marry the divorced wife of his son. 423. This divine commandment, now this is talking about the real son, not the adopted son. This divine commandment preserves our respect for our fathers and their most private affairs. Similarly, the prophet was a father figure to the believers of his time. For the good of those believers, God enjoined them from marrying women who were previously married to the prophet. Marriage is a sacred and a very private relationship, and the prophet's private life was better kept private. So, this was a provision put in place by God to protect his privacy and respect for his wives. And as we can see from the footnote, for as a respect for the fathers, as a respect for Muhammad and his private life, believers were enjoined from marrying his wife after he died. So also we see, in addition to that, that God teaches us everything, and God talks about etiquette. So obviously now this verse is only about the prophet, but it shows it came for a reason to show etiquette, to teach the believers etiquette. And now, I mean, that shouldn't just apply. I mean, etiquette, is for everybody, right? I mean, etiquette, you do not need to be around Prophet Muhammad to practice etiquette. And I think being respectful of people's times and people's privacy is general etiquette. And in certain, maybe in certain cultures, this is not something that is really well practiced, but in societies that are believing societies or more submitter like societies, I would say, people are generally respectful and they have etiquette. And so part of etiquette is being respectful of people's time. And obviously, especially if you're in their home, and you're, invited to come and eat, after eating, obviously you're not just going to eat and get up and leave right away. You're going to eat and talk and socialize, right? But someone invited you for dinner and you end up staying there for hours, and obviously the other person's polite. He's not going to tell you to get up and leave because they have to go to bed, or they're tired, But the thing is, it's for you to have the etiquette and for you to be considerate of the other person's time and do the right thing and politely just leave after you eat. I mean, if you just stay there and keep talking, 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 and engage the other person and exhaust them, that's not something good. Obviously, I mean, people have other things as well, and so if you just take all of their time like this, it would hurt them basically because it takes away from their day, it takes away from their activities. It puts them off on certain tasks. Other many people have things to do, and let's say you come to somebody's house, you decide you're not going to do anything for the rest of the evening, but the other person has to do a lot of things, and so may have to do a lot of things. And so in Prophet's case, obviously he was with his wives, and he needed time for his privacy also. And there might be other things that things he would have to do, and that goes for everybody, right? So in general, we're being taught that we should be respectful and have etiquette and be considerate of people's times and people's homes when we're invited. And we should not, when you're invited to somebody's house, you shouldn't overextend the invitation. Like someone invited you for dinner and you end up staying the whole day. They might not have wanted that, and they might be very polite not to tell you, because they don't want to hurt your feelings. But I mean, it's not about being blunt and straightforward, right? I mean, you generally want to be polite and be kind to people, and so if you tell them, hey, maybe it's time you should go, it's not something very nice, so normally you wouldn't say it. So it's up to the person who was invited, to be considerate of how long he was invited for, and just leave at a reasonable time. And I have personally seen this, being abused by a lot of people, in group settings, so that shouldn't happen, especially younger people, so we have to be careful about that. Verse 54, whether you declare anything or hide it, God is fully aware of all things. The women may relax their dress code around their fathers, their sons, their brothers, the sons of their brothers, the sons of their sisters, the other women, and their female servants. They shall reverence God. God witnesses all things. So God says this is talking about the dress code for women. Obviously, women are supposed to, both men and women are supposed to dress modestly. And but this verse is talking about women that they may relax their dress code around their fathers, their sons, their brothers, the sons of their brothers, the sons of their sisters, and other women and their female servants. And their female servants. So this is not talking about the male servants. So only talking about your, very close family members. It's not talking about, for example, for your father's brother or your mother's brother, but it's talking about your fathers, the sons of your fathers, the sons of your sisters, and other women. So the sons of their brothers and the sons of their sisters, you know, are probably going to be, young people, right? And so, but these are people that you cannot get married to. Also, so you can relax your dress code around these people, and obviously, there's no question of any kind of a sexual interaction. So it's completely okay. Verse 56, during the prophet's life, God and his angels help and support the prophet. O you who believe, you shall help and support him and regard him as he should be regarded. And the footnote says the word prophet, Nabi, consistently refers to Muhammad only when he was alive. Satan used this verse to entice the Muslims into commemorating Muhammad constantly instead of commemorating God as enjoined in 33:41 to 42. So, this verse is um, is one of the most abused verses in the so-called Islamic world by the so-called Muslims. The Mohammedans who idolize Prophet Muhammad against his will, use this verse as an excuse to idolize him. This is the abuse of the Quran, and this shows how people can take verses and twist them for their own needs. And so these people wanted to idolize Muhammad, and they wanted to look for, so they found a verse in the Quran that they could twist and use it. Obviously, it was in accordance with God's will, but they found a verse in the Quran and twisted the meaning of it to, get what they want, which is idol worship, to commemorate Muhammad hundreds of times a day, they commemorate Muhammad just like they commemorate God when they implore God. Even they mention Muhammad and send salutations on Muhammad every time his name is mentioned. Kiss their hands, put their hand on their chest, and all kinds of stuff to show their respect for Muhammad. Some people I've seen even go into prostration every time Muhammad is mentioned, right? So this is very extreme, and I mean it's an abuse of the verse. I mean every person that who calls himself a Muslim in most of these so-called Islamic countries, will know this verse from the Quran. will have seen this verse, and it's probably bombarded. They're probably bombarded with the same verse, like at least I would say like I know for Pakistan, for example, you hear it like at least twice, 3 times a week or more, depending on how often you're around people or how much you're watching TV. But it's just everywhere, right? And you constantly, Satan constantly makes people see this over and over and brainwash them, So they think that part of religion is to commemorate Muhammad, and they use this verse and a few other verses, right? But this is one of the main ones that they use to send this thing they call act of worship, this thing they call Darood and Salam, I mean, they're not calling it worship, you know, but just by having a different, fancier name for it doesn't change what you're doing. Literally, these people just sit and commemorate Muhammad for hours, you know. I remember before I was a submitter, I was told to sit and commemorate Muhammad like 200 times a day using these, for example. And so there's many others, right? So they're like, okay, so you should mention God 1,000 times, and then during that 200 times, you commemorate Muhammad, right? So that nullifies those 1,000 times that you commemorate God also, because idol worship nullifies all things, So basically, these people are nullifying all their works. I mean, we just recently had the 12th of Rabiul Awal, right, which is like the day that Muhammad was born, and people are just flagrantly just crazy about idolizing Muhammad and worshiping him. They're going nuts, and celebrating it like Christmas and cutting cakes and putting lights, decorating their streets and everything. And it's just ridiculous. And Muhammad has no idea, and he will disown them with despise and hatred, because they're doing an act that is an unforgivable offense that is so abhorred by God. But Satan has made it so beautiful, just like for Christians, he had made Christmas so amazing that they celebrate his birth. And obviously, the Muslims have learned from them also. But then they've, I mean, but idol worship, human beings have the tendency to worship idols, and so they need someone they can worship, someone they can look up to, and someone they can follow, not as a leader but as a god, beside God. And that's why we came here, because we thought there could be another god beside God, and we were not sure. So this whole test is designed around whether we're going to be monotheist submitters, worshiping God alone, and fall into some kind of trap for idol worship. And sure enough, majority of the people on earth will fall for it. It's Satan's one of the most effective baits, for example, to use something like intercession, So they think that, yeah, if you do this, Muhammad will intercede on your behalf, your rank will increase with God, all this stuff. Satan makes all these false promises to trap people. This is how he's a liar. And he adorns these things in people's eyes. For people that he wants to sin this way, he makes it so glamorous and so attractive in their eyes. Like not just Muhammad, right? I mean, Jesus is the same, right? People are willing to just sacrifice their lives over a cartoon of Muhammad, for example. They just go and kill people. If you make a picture of Muhammad, for example, and same thing with other idols. People do, they love their idols, or they're supposed to love God. They're supposed to love God the way they love Muhammad. If they loved God the way they love Muhammad, I mean, you can not imagine, I mean, how further along they would be in the human society, the so-called Muslims, but they're defeated and looked down upon and failures in this world because they are idol worshippers, and God doesn't make them successful in this world. I mean, they even may be prosperous, like the Arabs, but they're still looked down upon. and rightfully so. So the thing is, if you worship God alone, God will make you successful, make you prosperous, make you happy. But these people who worship Muhammad end up doing this stuff, and then it just becomes like a, if you really go through with it, like look at it, it's more their love for Muhammad is more like mourning of Muhammad and longing for Muhammad or wanting to be with Muhammad. Obviously, you're longing for a dead man that you're never gonna meet or be with. It's worse if you're a man, longing for another male. But it's disgusting simply because he is just a dead man who has no idea of this worship, and you're comparing it to God, who is the Lord of the heavens and the earth and created everything, and has really, I mean, if you compare him to a man, not a dead man even, just a man, he's nothing, right? But they give him the same status as God, for no reason, for no basis. Muhammad was no special than me and you, other than the fact that God chose him as a prophet, as a messenger, to give him his message. We're not even supposed to make a distinction between Muhammad and other prophets and other messengers, right? Even if they didn't have Quran. But you clearly see that they use this verse and other verses to make a clear, big distinction between him and all other messengers. And that in itself becomes idol worship, because you're making a distinction and, elevating one over the other and using that to idolize them and think about them and, you know, um, just so much corruption and so much hypocrisy, that you see from these people. And it's very, this verse comes very handy for these people. But we learn from the footnote that it only refers to Muhammad Nabi. The word Nabi in Arabic only refers to Muhammad during his life. So this verse is calling him as Nabi. So it's about supporting him during his life. So many verses, as you can see, as we read here about etiquette and all these stuff, apply to the prophet during his time when he was alive. So when any messenger, any prophet was alive, that's just not about Muhammad. You're expected to help and support him. If Dr. Khalifa was here now, we would be expected to help and support him. And angels will help and support him too, and they did. God and His angels. So there's nothing different about Muhammad here. But people use this verse and twist it to idolize him. Verse 57 says, "Surely those who oppose God and his messenger, God afflicts them with a curse in this life and in the hereafter. He has prepared for them a shameful retribution. Those who persecute the believing men and women who did not do anything wrong have committed not only a falsehood, but a gross sin." So those who oppose God and his messenger are also people who are idolizing him against his will, because he did not want that. He came with the message that people should worship God alone. And so when you're doing that, you're actually disobeying the prophet and disobeying God. You're opposing the messenger, you're opposing all the messengers, and you're opposing God. And so God says he afflicts them with a curse in this life and the hereafter. And what is that curse? I mean, you just live in hell and misery in this world and the hereafter. You're just never going to be happy. You could have billions of dollars and you could still not be happy. You could still be miserable. And you could still want more money. You could be crazy running for money just like anybody else. So $1 billion doesn't mean anything. It's just a number in your head that you don't care about at the end of the day because you need another billion, right? I mean, how do we measure wealth? When we have money, if we have $10 and we need 20 and we're unhappy, that's what we think wealth would do. It would make us satisfied and happy, so because we have money. But when you have $2 billion and you need another billion, and I'm going with the lower figure here, 2 billion, and you need another billion, you're not happy because you want another billion, and you think that when you have the other billion, you're going to be happier and it's going to give you what you want. And so just people are constantly running in this rat race. Like I see on the media, like I was just watching this thing about this Arab guy who spent I don't know $10 billion in investment to something, and I'm thinking like, why does a person with $10 billion need to invest in anything? He has enough money just to live comfortably and die. I mean, he can eat all he wants, buy everything he wants. He doesn't need to invest anything. But they're all running out there just to get more and more and more and more. They're just never satisfied. The greed does not stop because it doesn't make you happy. And God says, those who persecute the believing men and believing women who did not do anything wrong have committed not only a falsehood but a gross sin. So we can see here that persecuting people, especially if they are submitters, over their belief, over the stances they take, over the positions they take, the decisions they make regarding God. If you persecute them on that, I mean, it's not just wrong. I mean, it is a gross sin. God says, you know, and you see that coming a lot from hypocrites who call themselves submitters, and they will be, uh, you know, doing a lot of that persecution part, along with the disbelievers as well. So God is letting us know that those who do that, of course, if you're persecuted by a disbeliever, it's not as hurtful as if you're persecuted by hypocrites who you may think are believers, right? But the thing is, the fact remains that if you do persecute them, it is a sin, and I think it is a bigger sin coming from someone who calls themselves a submitter, obviously, because it hurts the other person more because they think it's coming from someone that they trust and they believe and they consider as family. So people have to be very careful, I mean, obviously, persecuting them for their belief, meaning that you're persecuting them for something righteous. Someone believes in God alone and you persecute them. I mean, what happens in the so-called Islamic countries? You say you oppose what they're doing with Muhammad, and you say this verse is talking about just supporting Muhammad in his life. You're not supposed to send him salutations and worship him all day long. They'll throw you in jail or they will kill you, right? And this is persecution at its worst, right? And they're doing it without hesitation, and they're calling them names and doing all sorts of acts if they're not killing them. They're making sure their lives are miserable. So they're trying to, obviously, if you're a believer, God will protect you from all of this, you know. But they don't want anyone to believe in God alone, and they will persecute them. They'll hate them for that. Dress code for women, verse 59. O prophet, tell your wives, your daughters, and the wives of the believers that they shall lengthen their garments. Thus they will be recognized as righteous women and avoid being insulted. God is forgiver, most merciful. So this verse is talking about the dress code, and how important it is for women. So it says, tell your wives, your daughters, and the wives of your believers, they shall lengthen their garments. Now, lengthening the garments means that your garments a little bit longer than normal average people, like the way you see. You're not wearing like mini skirts and very short shorts that show everything. You're covering yourself. We know the minimum dress code, right? So you're going more than that, and you're covering yourself more. So it's all common sense, basically. You're dressing up as a righteous, modest person, you know, and so people don't look at you like you're looking for, sexual attention, or you're a person who doesn't have morals and self-respect, or or you don't care about chastity. Obviously, people who are like walking around half naked, they want to attract this sort of behavior, and naturally, naturally it attracts it, whether you want it or not. Okay, because this is what it portrays outside. So God says, in order to avoid that, in order to avoid being insulted and being hit upon and teased, you shall dress modestly. So someone sees you in the street, they understand you're a righteous person. You're not like a prostitute or a person with similar character, you know, who sleeps around, for example. So you dress in a modest way that you look righteous. You look like you are respectful of your own self, and you're not throwing yourself to strangers. And so they get that message and they don't tease you, basically. Verse 60, unless the hypocrites and those with disease in their hearts and the vicious liars of the city refrain from persecuting you, we will surely grant you the upper hand. Then they will be forced to leave within a short while. They have incurred condemnation wherever they go, unless they stop attacking you. They may be taken and killed. This is God's eternal system, and you will find that God's system is unchangeable. So we can see in this verse that it talks about hypocrites. Also, it doesn't talk about just disbelievers, right? It talks about hypocrites and those with disease in their hearts and the vicious liars of the city. So, like all disbelievers, refrain from persecuting you. We will surely grant you the upper hand. Then they will be forced to leave within a short while. But it says, if unless they stop from attacking you, they may be taken and killed. You know, and so like you can't be nice with these people, right? They're attacking you and stuff. I mean, if you find them soft, they find you soft, and you're like, oh, it's okay, I don't mind, I'm the kind person who's like, for example, in Christianity, like they say, turn the other cheek, and so you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to defend yourself, and if they attack you, you're supposed to attack them back. And here it's saying to the prophet that they may be taken and killed. You know, in fact, it doesn't even mention the prophet here. So it's talking about believers. They attack the believers. I mean, if you're attacked in this manner, where your life is threatened, you can defend yourself, and you could kill them in self-defense if it's really dangerous, where you're defending yourself, and God is allowing that. But of course, that's a very extreme situation, right? And so, but the thing is, you're supposed to defend yourself if you're in a position where you're attacked. If you're physically attacked, you're supposed to physically defend yourself. If you're verbally attacked, I mean, you can respond, appropriately as well. They're not. God says you're supposed to be harsh and stern with the disbelievers and the hypocrites. You're not supposed to be kind. You're only kind and compassionate with the believers. I mean, it's very easy, in my opinion, to be kind to everybody. To be kind to everybody because everybody likes kindness. And you'll get your way in a lot of things. You can get benefit in the worldly manner. Just be good to everybody, have good relations with everybody, and you'll get along just fine, get benefits from everyone. uh, you know it will help you in the worldly sense, so to speak, right? And you will not have to have a turbulent relationship with anybody, no arguments, nothing. It's easier to do that, you know but you kind of have to go against your nature when you have to be harsh and stern with people. So it's more difficult to be harsh and stern than it is to be kind, to the disbelievers and hypocrites. To the believers, it's easy to be kind, obviously, and we should be kinder. We should be very kind with the believers, but with the believers, not with the hypocrites. So in that way, you also have to know who is a disbeliever and who's a hypocrite. by using the description from the Quran and comparing it to what you see. But once you understand the difference, you're supposed to treat them very differently. There are people who don't treat them differently. There are people who want to be kind to everybody. And obviously, they're not following God's law here. God says, this is God's eternal system, and you will find that God's system is unchangeable. God says they have incurred condemnation, basically, in the previous verse, wherever they go. Unless they refrain from attacking you, they may be taken and killed. So God says this is the eternal system, and you find that God's system is unchangeable, meaning that they are cursed, and they'll have defeat and misery in every situation, and God will give the believers the upper hand always when they stand up for God. Verse 63, end of the world revealed. The people ask you about the hour, end of the world. Say the knowledge thereof is only with God. For all that you know, the hour may be close. And we see that the footnote says less than a century ago, only God possessed knowledge about television and space satellites, for example. He revealed this knowledge at the predetermined time. Similarly, God has revealed the time appointed for the end of the world, Appendix 25. So the full knowledge for the end of the world is with God. And so we still don't know like the exact day and time. There's actually people who have come up with exact day and time in their opinion, and they call themselves submitters too. There's a big group in India, and I saw them on the internet. There's like a lot of them, and they think that for some reason, they decided that the world is going to end in 2281 instead of 2280. They added one other year, and they've added. I mean, there's like a full day and everything. They've added to it. I don't know where they get this thing from, but we know the world would end in 2280 according to the Messenger of the Covenant, and according to the Quran, according to the initials, the geometrical value of the initials. We know for a fact that now that the world would end in 2280, but at that time it was limited. Now God only has this information. Like until the television came, only God had this information. But at a certain time, God decided to give us this information. And so that what we see in the footnote also is that after a certain amount of time, he revealed this knowledge, at the time that was designated to reveal it. So obviously at the time of the Quran's revelation, only God knew about the time. But even right now, we don't know the exact date and time. Only God knows the exact date and time, but we know that the year will be 2280 AD. And you can see Appendix 25 for details for that. The followers turn on their leaders, verse 64. God has condemned the disbelievers and has prepared for them hell. Eternally they abide therein. They will find no Lord nor a supporter. The day they are thrown into hell, they will say, "Oh, we wish we obeyed God and obeyed the messenger." They will say, "Our Lord, we have obeyed our masters and leaders, but they led us astray. Our Lord, give them double the retribution and curse them a tremendous curse. O you who believe, do not be like those who heard Moses." Then God absolved him of what they said. He was in the sight of God honorable. O you who believe, reverence God and utter only the correct utterances. So we see here that in this world, these people that are following leaders. I mean, people who say they don't believe in the messenger or following the messenger or following God, for that matter. They're following somebody. They're following these leaders. If they say that they don't have any leader, they're still following Satan. But most people are following certain leaders that introduce them to certain beliefs, and then they just blindly follow in their footsteps. Someone is created as an agent of Satan who misleads the millions behind them, and so those leaders uh, will get their fair share on the day of judgment also. They will turn against the leaders, obviously, and they'll ask God to double the retribution for them as well. And God says the retribution for all of them will be doubled because they all misled everybody else. And it's like a ripple effect. You can see from everybody, they all reinforce this belief and idea and continue to pass it on till the end of the world. So all those people that they affected, they definitely misled people, other people, you know. So God says that on the day of judgment they will be so remorseful and they'll say, "Oh, I wish I followed God and I followed the messenger." You have a lot of people today that want to follow God, want to follow Quran, but they don't want to follow the messenger because they think the messenger is saying something other than what God is saying. You know. And but we know that the following God and the messenger is synonymous because they're saying, telling you to do the same thing, worship God alone, follow the Quran alone. So if you're listening to the messenger and the messenger is only telling you to follow God alone, follow Quran alone, and saying the same thing, you cannot go wrong by listening to the messenger. If I say I want to obey the messenger is what? He's a guiding teacher. So you're listening to his words, you're not going to go wrong from that. You cannot say, no, I'm not going to listen to the messenger because God says follow God alone. Well, God says he follow God alone, but he says he sends a messenger. You have to obey the messenger. That's following God. I mean, it's different from Muhammad because people made up lies about him. But when Muhammad was alive and whatever he was saying, people were supposed to follow him. It's not the same as hadith. We cannot confuse the two. And so people who do that, I mean, they're simply being trapped by Satan. That's not idol worship. Idol worship would be if you're doing something that are lies and attributed to a messenger, and you're following them. I mean, that could be idol worship. You're following other than the Quran, but whatever the messenger is saying is from the Quran. I mean, it's a very clear thing to understand, and God will only guide the believers, and the hypocrites will just get trapped by this. So may God guide us, continue to show us the right way, and continue to support us and help us in our journey in submission. Uh, God willing, if you guys have any comments or questions, you can share. Thank you.
MashaAllah, brother.
MashaAllah.
MashaAllah, Brother Suleman.
Thank you. Okay, so for those who joined later, we read from Surah 33, verse 50, all the way to verse 70. So if you guys have any comments or questions about these verses, please do share.
Yeah, I have a question about that verse where prophet, God is talking to the prophet. Oh, you prophet. Hold on. So that verse where God is talking to the prophet, that where the dowry is. Let me see, find it. So, so you were saying that this only applies to the prophet, but in the same category, God is allowing him to marry the cousins. So does that mean that only applies to the prophet, marrying the cousins?
No, marrying the cousin doesn't apply only to the prophet. It says the forfeiting of the dowry applies only to the prophet. In the verse, it says the forfeiting applies only to the prophet
But
specifically.
but but in the same thing that it continues, that you may send away, and then it goes back to the prophet. Then you
No,
may
no.
send one out many.
If you read verse 50, right? In
Uh-huh.
verse 50, it clearly says, it says, however, her forfeiting of the dowry applies only to the prophet and not to the other believers. So that's the only reason we're saying. And God is specifically saying what only applies to the
Mm-hmm.
prophet, you know? And he doesn't say like all
Okay.
this applies only to the prophet, right?
So then the verse 51 also applies to all of us.
Well, the verse
You may
51
gently shed
is
away.
no, no, this is generally talking about the prophet, right? But the forfeiting of the dowry, it is letting us know that that applies only to the prophet. But yeah, I mean, I would think that, I mean,
I mean,
well,
there's
the thing is,
two or three.
if you have multiple wives, I mean, what are you gonna do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, so that 51 also applies to generally who has more than one wife, right? Just a
Uh,
question. I'm not
yeah, yeah.
criticizing or
No, no,
anything.
I know. I'm looking at it
Mm-hmm.
with you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think this is still talking about the prophet, but the categories we
Right.
know for marriage are. I don't think this is the only verse that talks about marriage categories. So there's other verses that talk, but this is referring to the prophet, talking to the prophet, right? But I think the categories of marriage. I think there is another verse also, if I'm not wrong, that talk about the lawful for you in marriage are, you know, there's another verse. But yeah, this whole thing is talking to the prophets, right? So let me pull up that
Yeah, and
verse.
I understand. Yeah, the Surah 4, it pretty much literally like saying do not marry more than one wife. The way if you really see that you will never be equitable and you can no matter how much you try.
Hmm.
So basically, it's advice from God that no matter how much you try, you can never do that. So
Hmm.
basically, in other words, God is saying, you better stay with one person, and that's understandable. Yes, and yeah, of course, Prophet was very busy with a lot of stuff going on with the battles and preaching the message and everything. So he has too much going on in his life. That understandable, and that is one of the reason that when God is saying that if you're invited to the prophet's home and to eat and do not engage in the lengthy conversation, because obviously he's a very busy man. He has so much to do, and by just talking about nonsense stuff here and there, what's going on in the community or just out of religion, it's gonna waste his time. And to me, I think also it applies somewhat on our life that the time is very precious, that we should not waste our own time if someone is a submitter or believer to just going to the parties and just talking nonsense. I think my sister Shima also talked about that. That just people talk about nonsense, long, lengthy conversation, which is nothing productive. And even God says that the believers they don't engage in the in vain talks. You know, I mean, there's nothing positive that can be discussed. Mashallah, praise God. One of the things that about the cousins marriage is, yes, God allows you to do that, but it is so funny that I mean the traditional Muslims, they take this part gladly and they want to marry. I mean, I met several family people, not my family but other, and they do so much in their cousins that they don't even marry outside their family, for the reason is to stay the wealth inside the family. They don't want to share their wealth with other people, so that stays
Hmm.
in their family. And just they just love their own family so much they don't want to marry outside.
Hmm.
And That's okay. I mean, if you are using, but the problem is that when you take one verse so strongly because God says that, and then you overlook many other verses, you don't even pay attention to them. I mean, there's so many other commandments that God is allowing us and letting us do it. Then you walk away from that, or you don't believe in those verses or the commandments. But whatever you like, you use it. And basically all these verses are for the believers. Basically, I mean, if you believe in the Quran, if you believe in the message, I think that's the only time it applies on you. If you don't even believe, if you don't even follow what God says, then you just you believe your imams and ulama and everything, and then it doesn't even
Moms
make
or
any sense.
imams?
Imams and all those
What
stuff
is
that
a
they follow,
moms?
because we went to a dinner somewhere, and then they had their food cooked they were all like halal people. I call them halal.
Halal people.
and then the lady, the person did not even eat the food. And I'm like, why did you waste all that food? And they say that they cooked the regular meat on the same equipment, or the grill. And I'm like, that was a big plate, you wasted that. I said, because what if the little oil that can go into the food from the other meat? And I don't want to even do that. I said, why? He said they cook because they cook pork on that grill. And so why don't you eat pork? I said, what are you talking about? God has prohibited it. I said, God has prohibited the meat, not the fat and other stuff. But okay, I understand your point. You don't you're that serious. You take the God's commandment to that level that I don't even want to go close to something God has prohibited. I salute you. I salute you for that. You're taking God's commandment that level. But I had
You're
earlier
being
that
sarcastic?
yes, yes, and then yes, and then I earlier I had the conversation with that same person about the voodoo. I said, but what about voodoo? You have mixed up so many other things in the voodoo. You know, you take one commandment to the level, but you don't even you waste the whole food because you think maybe might have a tiny splash of oil that could have got in there, which you don't even know. You take the commandment to that level, but on the other hand, God is specifically telling you just do the 4 steps. Why do you mix all this stuff up? No answer. No answer whatsoever. But then he says, well, when I'm standing in the salat, I need to rinse my mouth because I'm talking to God. What if the bad smell comes out? And I said, okay, fine. I even take that. You respect God so much that when you talk to God, you don't want even God to smell your breath. Fine. But can you do me a favor? Can you do the 4 step the way God
God
says?
can
Yeah.
smell him when he goes to the bathroom.
Exactly.
So
Yeah, I mean, while you say Bismillah while you're eating, you saying Bismillah or say something else. I said, okay, fine. I will salute you that you don't even got to smell your bad smell, but the amount of respect that you're giving to God is amazing. Then do exactly what God says, 4 steps, and out of that, I want you to brush your teeth. I want you to go above that stuff. Not rinse your mouth. Brush your teeth with such a good toothpaste
yeah, and
that give you mint,
floss.
floss it, and use a bubble gum. And then how about that? I mean, see, this is where people get exposed. It's not they're doing for God; it's the idolization with the. But that person was really shocked
No,
with
they
the
say
eyes
they say you have to use maswak,
miswak.
that
Yes,
stick.
that's
Yeah,
that's even
so
higher.
not toothbrush.
No, these those miswak people are even higher than these. They are higher in rank with their moms.
Yeah,
Like
and
people are higher in
that's
ranks with God. They are higher in ranks with their moms because they're using miswak.
every time you say moms, it sounds like you're saying moms.
Moms, yeah.
Moms.
Yeah, yeah. You said, it's how you corner people.
Yeah.
You trap them, and they're like, "Oh my God, this person is, cherishing me and saying, oh my God, I'm so good." But then you corner them at the point where they're stunned. But that person really was taking the message and then took the Quran from me, and hopefully, it comes out. But
Oh,
it all comes down to basic common sense. Common sense.
right.
That's all it is. Yeah. Mashallah. And the other comment was that from Brother Masood that he did the last Quran study, where he said the verse, I think is verse number, I think 43, if I'm not wrong, where God says, and I'll talk a little bit about the Arabic grammar, and God says, Huwa lazi, in that verse, that He is the one who sends the. Um, let me see. In fact,
He's
let
the
me
one who
pull it
helps
and
you together with his angels.
together with the angels. Yes, I think it's verse
To light you out
43.
of darkness into the light. He's the
Yes,
most merciful towards the believers.
believers. So this is where God
Mhm.
is talking to the believers. So He says the word "huwa lazi." He's the one yusalli. That's the grammar that when you say Rabbi, my Rab, Rabbana, our Rab. So it's like a singular and plural in English with putting an S on yusalluna. On in verse 56, Inna Allaha wa malaikatu yusalluna. Yusalluna is like a plural form of yusalli. The same word. And I told that even that to the person that look here, this they translate Yusalli with rahmat, with mercy. So he's the one who sends mercy upon his believers. And but here 56 is the same word is used, but I even showed them it, and they translate it as the durud, as you explained. So one word, two different translation to divert people from the right path, where it's clearly understandable. And I said, do you think God has to send a durud to his prophet? Does it make any sense? And if you look at the translation of the durud, it's basically saying, "Oh, our God, give Prophet Muhammad what you have given to Ibrahim. The mercy and blessing you gave to Ibrahim, give also to Muhammad." So you are saying that durud to God, and you are saying that God and his angels are saying the same durud to prophet. Doesn't make any sense. And God is, so if that's what you're saying, then God is and his angels are saying that, oh God, then they are calling who to God, that give Ibrahim the blessings and the mercy and all that stuff what you have given to Ibrahim. You know, I mean, it doesn't even add up, and why would God has to send blessings to the prophet? He's the Almighty. He has everything. And on the other hand, you claim in your books that he is in the best place, he's in the best heaven. He has even have the sabil in the heavens, where only the believers will be able to drink from the sabil. So you're already saying that he's in the one of the best places can possibly be. Then what is why you're sending blessing to him for? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Somebody's already in the highest level. Why
Mhm.
would you send him any blessings? That
Yeah.
completely violates the verses of the Quran.
Mhm.
Doesn't add up. One where
Right.
you hear and then the other where you're
Mhm.
something different. Doesn't add up.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Actually, I think I would like to read an excerpt from the book by Dr. Khalifa, Quran, Hadith, and Islam. So there, under the abuse of the Quran, it says, verse 33-56, it says, God and his angels encourage the Prophet, O you who believe, you too shall encourage him and support him completely. And then it says, this is by far the most abused verse in the whole Quran. Through satanic distortions, ignorance and idol worship, through satanic distortions, ignorance, and idol worship, this verse causes millions of Muslims to glorify the Prophet against his will instead of glorifying God. It says, people who sing the praises of this particular verse day and night are obviously ignorant of two important facts. Number one, the word Nabi equals prophet when referring to the Prophet Muhammad always refers to him when he was alive, not after his death. Number two, in the same surah and 13 verses ahead of this verse, we find that God and the angels do the same honoring to all the believers. 33:43, it says, uh, God and his angels encourage the believers to take them out of darkness into the light. The abuse of Quran. The verse 103 of Surah 9 further clarifies the meaning of the words Sallu and Yusalli. In this verse, we see that the Prophet is commanded to Yusalli for the believers, just as they are asked to do for him in verse 56 of Surah 33. See page 20. Take, O Muhammad, a portion of their money for charity in order to purify them and sanctify them and encourage them. Salli alayhim, for your encouragement is a consolation for them. God is hearer, omniscient. This is Surah 9, verse 103. So it says, thus the true meaning of the expression is to encourage or support, I say, and not praise day and night, as those who abuse the Quran have indicated. Summary: God and his angels encourage the believers to take him out of darkness into the light. 33:43. Number two, God and his angels encourage the Prophet during his life to keep him on the right path. 33:56. The believers are asked to support the Prophet during his life. 33:56. And the Prophet does the same for the believers. 9:103. And then the other part is, they use verse 32:21. They say, "In the messenger of God, you have a good example for those who are seeking God in the last day and commemorate God frequently." 33:21. Satan used this verse to claim a special status for the idolization of Muhammad and to convince the people of the necessity of Sunnah traditions of the Prophet. There is no doubt that Prophet Muhammad is our best example, and his example is set by upholding the Quran and nothing but Quran. Obviously, those who fell in Satan's trap are ignorant of the fact that Abraham is described in the Quran in the same words, word by word, in Surah 60, verse 4 and 6. In Abraham and those who believe with him, we have a good example for those who seek God in the last day. So just wanted to share that as well. It's in the book Quran, Hadith, and Islam by Dr. Khalifa.
Yeah, this is very important that 9103 also
Number
use the
three,
same
yeah.
word.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and they translate different. So the argument usually they make is that the one word has many meanings, and that is absolutely true in any language. One word can be used to describe different things, and it all depends on the content of the speech. I mean, if you're talking about something and then you follow that speech and you know what does it mean. I mean, in different speech, different topic, it will have a different meaning. And so why use that excuse in Quran only, that one word have many meaning? You follow this the topic. So in right here, as we're talking about the verse 56, and if you go to the next verse 57, it's talking about the verse 56, because surely those who oppose God and his messenger, God afflicts them with a curse in this life, and in the hereafter he has prepared for them the shameful retribution. So it's extension to verse 56. It's not talking about in general. It's in general, it applies, yes, but it's specifically talking about 56, but God has said. And if you take the different meaning and you corrupt other people and you make them to send salutations to the Prophet, you're opposing verse 56, even though you know this is what it means. And then that's what's going to happen. You have curse in this life and in the hereafter, and he has prepared for them a shameful retribution. I mean, this is a very serious matter. And then the extension to that will be 58, that those who persecute the believing men and women, believing women, those who believe in God the way it's supposed to be believing, and they take the verse 56 as it's supposed to be taken, and they don't mix with the other words and start praising prophet instead of God, or praising God prophet beside God, and the balance is completely off. They will just say Allah one time or few times, but then they sell the salutations to the Prophet for 5 times or 6 times at least. As we have seen in going to the Jummah prayers, they will praise Prophet for like at least 30 seconds, where they just mention God one time. So if anybody who believe in God the way it's supposed to be believing, and you persecute them, and God says these believing men who did not do anything wrong, and what happens, have committed not only falsehood but a gross sin. So these people, they're objecting and persecuting the believing men and women. Not only they're doing falsehood, that's a gross sin on their part, and they will have curse in this life and in the hereafter, and God has prepared a very shameful retribution. Mashallah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, it's hard to understand like why don't the people like they consider, for example, Muhammad being so amazing since God gave the Quran to him, right? They say, or God made him the last prophet, but then why don't they worship God if they're giving him so much honor because God did something for him? Then what about God? Then they forget about God. They only are concerned about Muhammad. Like they spend so much time. I mean, the whole religion is built around Muhammad, and everything is about Muhammad did this and Muhammad did that. But they totally forget about God. Like, why don't you, like recently something happened. I was talking to this person, and something bad happened. They're like, oh, I'm gonna tell her to say the Durud, Like, I'm like, what is that gonna do? Why don't you just ask God for help? Something bad happens, you're gonna go and commemorate Muhammad. That doesn't make any sense. Um, yeah, anyways,
Yeah, he doesn't need our prayers. He's already in the best place. You, other hand, need all the prayers or salvation that you need. He's already been saved. He's the messenger of God. He's been saved. But you yourself need all this for your own soul, and you're not taking it, mashallah. And then one of the excuse, the objection is that, well, he's the one who brought the Quran to us. I say, well, then before him, Jibril brought the Quran from God to him. So why don't you add him in the durud too? I mean, in this, because he did half job, or maybe his job was even more. Who knows? Complicated, because he's the one was present with him, releasing through his heart to his memory slowly, slowly. So he maybe he did more job. Then why? Then you will be equal to the Christians, that the Holy Spirit, and the Prophet and God. You also become Trinity in that sense. So why not all dump all this stuff and just worship God alone? Praise be to God.
yeah. I mean, God gave the Bible to Jesus, so why don't they worship Jesus also?
Also, yeah,
The second to
he
Jesus,
also,
and then
yep,
Moses and all the other prophets. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, God says, He's the only one worthy of worship. It's in the Quran, right?
right,
But people cannot access the Quran when they are not sincere.
right. Yeah, and then they say that the whole Arab Peninsula is cannot be wrong. This is their language, they worship. I said, well, God spells out the word Arab in the Quran. They're worse in belief. They're worse. I mean, there are few things I mentioned, and the person did not believe in it. And I open up the Arabic context, and they say, look at this Al Arab, and look at the translation. They didn't translate Arab to Arab. They translate like the village people. I said,
Hmm.
why would this is where you see they're exposing themselves. God Himself is saying the Arabs are the worst in belief. Then you're gonna follow them. So I mean, like there's nothing, mashallah, praise God. When you talk to people, there's nothing. God gives you the signs one after whatever they give you objection. God takes you to the place. Okay, look here, right here it says that, and then accept nothing. They just have no answer. He's looking at your faces with no answer. Praise God. It's nothing, mashallah, praise God. When you talk to people, there's nothing, no answer. Praise God.
So I guess if there's no other comments or questions, God willing, we can conclude our study. So I guess if there's no other comments or questions, God willing.
You're gonna have to repeat yourself. We heard you. I'm just kidding.
So thank you all for joining. God willing, our next Quran study will be on Saturday. English Quran study will be on Saturday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. God bless you all. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu
God
alaikum,
bless
brother
you.
Assalamu
Suleman.
Shukran
alaikum.
alaykum.
Thank you, brother
So
Suleman.